Hello and welcome to This Week in Property. I'm your host, Richard Swan, and in today's show, I'm very excited because not only do I get to use my Scottish tongue with a beautiful Austrian surname and be able to say the word Kohlback. I love just exaggerating it. We've got Elisabeth Kohlback, this beautiful lady who's going to come on. But here's why I'm really excited, folks. So listen, if someone said to me, right, today, Richard, you've got a guest, right, on the show, on the content, you have property, assets, investing, artificial intelligence, algorithms, all this fun stuff, data capture, etc., sourcing, buying, refurbs, lettings. I mean, come on, I am in, because that ticks a lot of my boxes for my own personal excitement and interest. So, Elisabeth, it's fantastic to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be here, and especially happy to hear my surname pronounced so expertly.
There you go. Fantastic. Points to me.
Absolutely.
So we are going to be talking to you. We are going to be talking about a company, a whole entity called Skwire, and all the magic that those data people do there, and all the different services that are available that no doubt a lot of our listeners are going to be interested in, from landlord perspective, investing perspective, tenant perspective. Loads of stuff we're going to cover. But what about Elisabeth herself? How on earth did you get up to this point that we are about to talk to? You know, what's the kind of career path, the journey that you've been on yourself?
It's a bit of a funny one, that really, and it's a really good question. I find the property world is so often filled with people who've spent their whole lives in property, and well, I'm not that. So I'm, as you can pick up on the slightly strange accent, I'm originally from Austria. I've come over here to add to my law background, and having run a serviced apartments chain in Vienna, to add a bit of business acumen, really. So I used to work in a data science function where I introduced data science, led kind of scaling of processes, so scaling of operations for a fashion and furniture search engine. But my love was always in property, you know, the serviced apartments chain, the furniture, that's the way more exciting stuff. And figuring out how to apply data science to go through vast amounts of data to predict, you know, what kind of trouser style will be in fashion. Well, I realized you can apply the same principle to property. So what kind of elemental factors make a property higher yielding than others? What are tenants actually looking for? There is so much data in the real estate world, but most of the property people don't use it as much as we strange outsiders coming in. So yeah, when I came to the UK to go to London Business School, I expected Notting Hill, the cobbled streets, and a glass of wine on the roof terrace, and the reality was a rundown flat share in Kilburn with the weed from the estate next door and the fried fish smell from the other side. And I thought, you know, where have I gone wrong in my life?
Take me back, Vienna. Take me back.
No, but jokes aside, I spoke to my father and I said, this is not how I imagined it. And he said something that sparked the beginnings of Skwire. He said, you know, when I lived in London in the 70s, Notting Hill looked exactly like Kilburn looks now. And I was like, how can I figure out whether an area is going to be in Notting Hill or a Kilburn? Because if I can use data to figure out what type of short will be sold out, what kind of top people will go for, surely that same principle must be applied to property and will create a really interesting product. And that's the foundation of on which Skwire was built, really.
Wow, clever old dad. Fantastic. So tell me, after that paternal wisdom that I love to hear about, and then the idea, and you're juggling things around, how did that then become reality? How did that become an entity? And you're one of the co-founders, obviously. There's is it Bilal Khan as well? Did you both come together? Were you already studying, working, doing stuff together?
Yeah, so they're three co-founders, and it was actually, so I started off building it into a business called House 40 back then in business school, making use of the network that gave me, and the entrepreneurship schools that were absolutely fantastic in allowing me to stress test the idea. And how life often is, met with just started chatting to my neighbor at a random event that talked about accountancy for entrepreneurs or something like that. And the random guy I just chatted up because I was bored and waiting for the class to start ended up being a PropTech entrepreneur 3 years out of business school, or 2 years out of business school, who knew that his venture capitalist investor was looking for a very similar idea, was looking for exactly what I was doing, but didn't have a startup to invest in. So he connected us. I went to Wimbledon, met Vasily from Talis Capital, who has this really great vision of tech in the property market and what it can be applied to.
Right.
And I said, you know what, we share this vision. And yeah, we hashed out the business plan for Skwire together, founded the company together, and needed to look for a technical co-founder now to help build the product.
Right.
Which at that point was already clear, using the data that is out there to pinpoint on a hyper-local level what kind of yields different properties can achieve.
Right.
Because in the current rental climate, in the current investment climate, it's something that finding yield is a bit of a holy grail. So using data to find that in property rather than throwing your money at average, well-performing postcodes is just a next level of sophistication that we're looking to bring to the market.
That's fantastic. I love the synchronicity, all those things come to. That's just beautiful, you know. Dad has a throwaway comment, you have a throwaway conversation, and then before you know it, things are coming together. That really is the entrepreneurial world, and making things happen, taking steps, just an experiment, try it, come together. That's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Now, you mentioned that the kind of yields and forecasting and using data to do that. Does it also work more short term? If an investor, for example, is involved in the buy to flip model, they're looking to purchase, and then after some kind of added value, reselling it just quite shortly after, months or 1 year beyond. Can it also help? Can Skwire help in that area, or is it more long term based?
Yeah, so that's actually one thing that's quite close to my heart that we're going to build out in the future. Right. And it is that understanding of things like the overspill effect. So for the London centrics amongst us, as Clapham became more and more unaffordable, people started moving to Brixton. Same thing happened from Brixton to Tooting. And being able to understand that overspill effect in time before the big developers come in and cash in on it is where property investors can really profit. Right. So obviously any kind of buy and flip game will always be very market dependent, and there's an element of risk to it that isn't there as much with rental yield. Yeah. But the same principles apply.
Excellent. Now, make sure you keep a leash on my curiosity, because this stuff fascinates me. I want to just ask, right, how does that work? What does that do? So if I get close to anything that's, oh, wait a minute, that's kind of confidential, or that's sensitive, or that involves one of our clients, whatever, just tell me, just keep me right. But
don't worry, I will.
When we think about the data and stuff that you're talking about, where exactly are you starting to tap into? Are you pulling off things like online portals with Rightmove data and stuff behind it? Is it more kind of, it's demographics and it's to do with geography and location, or is it a whole host of things?
There is a whole host of data that goes into effectively understanding rental demand and supply patterns, because that is what drives the price, but just in a more nuanced manner and a more localized and sophisticated manner than you can do. In effect, we don't really look at anything that you wouldn't look at if you were to walk through an area and note the changes every day on your daily walk. I mean, you will notice things like a yoga studio replacing a chicken shop, and you understand what that means for the area. You'll notice that the demand for family houses is greater in an area where, where there's a good school and a school rating that has improved, versus you'll know there will be a different tenant demographic for smaller service departments. So we don't really use data you wouldn't expect, because that's, well, it's the same set of data. It's just a question of how much of it you can access and how clean the data is. A lot of things I see in the market is data that's based on averages. Now, I'm not sure about Scotland, but over here, down here in the south, when I turn a corner from my current address, it looks completely different.
Yeah, yeah,
London is not homogeneous, and neither is Manchester or Liverpool.
exactly.
So averages are often completely meaningless and misleading.
Yeah.
So it's really about this hyperlocality of data and down to the features of the property. So for example, we'll know that in Plymouth, in a particular outcode, a garden will increase rental revenue in the way parking space can't. But in a different outcode, that relationship reverses.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about the granularity.
Yeah, that is fantastic. That's incredible. What a use of different data. And as well as going low level, really look at, property specific, feature specific, does it also go high level to the extent that does it map on things happening with the economy, cycles and stuff above the market, or do you keep it within the bubble of property? How do you factor those things in?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, ideally, you'd have a full macro and micro picture, but in reality, there are so many macro shocks to the system that you can't predict. So if you'd asked me a year ago to do a full macro and micro picture on properties, say in suburbia, my opinion now would look very different.
Yes.
So there's a level of macro that you just can't predict.
Sure.
What you can do is look at, for example, in a recession, what kind of property is more likely to keep its value? What kind of tenant is more likely to keep paying rent?
Mm-hmm.
And for our investments, the investments we do on behalf of our investors, we of course also look at certain macro fundamentals that need to be right. So, population decline is not a good sign. Boarded up streets next door, not a good sign. So there's an element of macro that needs to be satisfied. But in the end, if I could predict the macro market, I would right now be enjoying a margarita in the Bahamas.
I think you would, yes. It goes the case for a lot of investors, my goodness. So what were the challenges? I mean, this sounds a breeze. Dad just said something to you, you had a wee idea, then there was a wee chat at a kind of meeting before some learning. This just sounds as if it went so simple and easily for you. I'm sure there was a few bumps in the road. I'm quite sure there was a few challenges. What did we come across?
Oh God, Richard, so many. I think a challenge that any disruptive startup will face is you're going into a market that has been quite resistant to innovation. There's a level of skepticism and almost a level of protectionism. Now, if you go into property and you bring tech, you're kind of the enemy to 80% of incumbents. The other 20, though, the key is to find those other 20 that welcome you with open arms. So any new startup will always have questions around the track record, and it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing here. It's at the beginning you have a concept and you need money to hire someone to build the tech product to prove the concept. So lots of angel investors without the bigger picture and without the bigger vision say, well, build me the product and then I'll invest. And you go, well, fine. And the same thing to an extent happens when you bring so the software we've built, so this kind of tech and data science driven approach we have, we are going to apply this to a multitude of products. So the first one, the one that we already offer, is source properties and source properties for investors that matches their investment criteria and maxes out the yield that they're looking for.
Okay. And when it comes to criteria, sorry for interrupting, do you just deal with one path? Like, okay, give us your yield that you're looking for and perhaps a location. Or no, I'd really like to, you need to satisfy the yield criteria for me. I also want a certain level of cash flow each month. I mean, how much space would you give an investor to set their criteria?
Yeah, so the beauty is that the beauty of Skwire here is that it's really up to the investor. So an investor, we're working with an investor now who's looking for 3-bed plus houses in certain locations with a certain minimum yield. So that's something we then find and assess for them. We're working with a different investor who is, or the first portfolio we've built started out as an Airbnb high yield portfolio, where we were maximizing for Airbnb revenue, which can, of course, massively outperform regular AST. So it really lends itself to different investment criteria and different processes as well. So whether it's just the sourcing part or the full tenant management, because we've quickly realized that finding the right properties is one thing, but a property's potential also depends on how you market it, whether it's been refurbed and presented to the right standard, and how you attract tenants and convert tenants. Right. So one thing I'm particularly proud of is because of the refurb and marketing process we've built up in the back end, we tenant our properties within 5 days on average.
Wow.
And that's just something, so it's not enough to just have the data. You can buy some of the data from other sources, but you also need to be able to execute on it. Right. So this first full service fund product is one application of the Skwire data. But as you already alluded to, there are multiple others. Yeah. If you're a build to rent developer and you want to underwrite your rental revenue, that's what we can do. We can tell you whether it's worth having a concierge in this particular development or not. We can tell you whether you should be building parking or not. So these are the kind of elements, this is the next product we're building out. But there are other things, like I said, the patterns of overspill effects and gentrifications. There's a product in there, right? There is a lot we can do.
And I mean, that obviously, specifically that area, that easily leads into the commercial side of things as well, you know, because if you have a real focus on where an area is going, what's happening, how the flow of people is going and so on and so forth, then there's the commercial side of things. Well, we actually want to maybe convert and lease out some shops, or well, actually we want to go the opposite way. We've got this leased building with some shops in it, but if we converted that to a couple of one bed flats or something, we're really going to make much more money off it. So does it lead into lots of different areas for you?
So it definitely can, yes. I mean, obviously the commercial sector is a bit different also in terms of the limitations it has. When you think about residential, a key limitation is that if you want to do it at scale, you can't just do build to rent because you're so limited with site selection, which is the same problem commercial faces. Yeah. But if you think about that, over 90% of the UK's housing stock is existing stock, Victorian, Edwardian, 30s places. Yeah. Allowing an investor to get into that at scale by using data, that's just a game changer. Right. Whereas in the commercial space, there are different providers who will tell you, expected footfall and expected tenancies, but in the end, you will always be limited by the site selection to a greater extent than you are in the existing housing stock.
Right, gotcha. Okay, so let's try and tap into the investors' desires who are listening in and watching just now, because I'm quite sure they're sitting up and paying attention to all the different data that you can gather. And what is it that you can then produce for them? Do you listen to what they ask for and then produce some specific reports? Do they create an account into one of your portals and they have a dashboard? How do you kind of deal with them?
Sure. So we monetize our data and tech in 3 main ways. So we offer 3 products. One is a sourcing agreement, where an investor says, I've got my own tenant management processes. All I want to know is what to buy where. Right. And we'll find those properties according to criteria and present them for inspection. The investor says yes or no. And that's a kind of a simple sourcing agreement. Potential to add on the tenant find and refurb part if that's desired. The second part is a portfolio. So we're currently raising for a 15 to 20 million high yield portfolio. That's going to be diversified across 3 regions, high yield, tenanted properties. Again, this is something that's quite appealing right now in terms of the yield landscape, and is something that we're ready to pull the trigger on. Fantastic. But we can also do bespoke portfolios. So for investors with maybe 5 million or 10 million to invest, we can also build a separate segregated account just for them and source and manage to their specifications. Do the management part as well, which is a big part of the headache, obviously. It really is. Especially if you go for the diversified properties, which give you the best risk reward, you need to have that solution. Yeah. And how did you build up that side of the business? Did you already have partners within the management space that you started to work with? Is it key players that you know and trust? So a lot of the property management is, again, done in quite an old-fashioned way. So We hired 2 property managers in-house to manage our properties remotely.
Right.
And I was quite shocked actually, because interviewing the first one, Davina, she's a superstar. And when we interviewed her, she said, "Oh, I've been managing my own estate agency. I've been managing 300 properties just from my inbox." Like, can you imagine if you give her a couple of tools? Can you imagine how you can leverage that? So what we do is, there is a lot of PropTech innovation out there, a lot of property management and tenant management systems, maintenance providers that you can outsource, and a lot of questions that tenants come up with, like, how do I turn on my boiler?
Yeah.
My key is broken, what do I do? Don't actually need a call out. They need information in a way that is convenient to get. So there's a huge possibility of reducing workload by integrating some PropTech solutions and reducing the admin time. There's no need for a property manager to manually send rent arrear reminders. All of this can be automated. Yeah. So just by putting that together, we've built a property management solution that's instead of 40 hours a week, takes 8 hours a week on admin. And that goes a very long way towards alleviating any worries about a diversified portfolio.
That's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Is there any minimum, maximum requirements for an investor that someone listening in just now should know about before they try and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so in terms of lower end of ticket size, we'd be looking to build portfolios of, say, 2 or 3 million. At the upper end, in terms of deployment speed, we'd probably be, depending on the yield criteria, of course, we'd be comfortable with anything up to 150 or 200 million.
Right. Okay. That's a parameters that's quite good for you to work in between just now. Excellent. You spoke about some of the setbacks at the start. Where are the big, I don't know, the excitements, the opportunities, the milestones that you can see looking forward in the future? What are you already hatching plans for that really excites you?
It's I mean, there's so much to do with this. So we're only really just scaling up this first product, this tech-enabled asset management, if you want.
Right.
If you think about it, that is the first product. Like I said, the next one of the next products will be helping build-to-rent providers to underwrite and to understand what should be in their developments, and being able to understand where to invest into what kind of amenities, maybe even in collaboration, public-private partnerships, collaborations with developers, maybe even informing regeneration projects. Right. Basically, what I'm excited about is providing that better renting to the UK. It's something that, having rented in Austria and Germany, when I came here, I was so disappointed in the rental market. There are so many strengths to it. Right. You have flexibility. You're not tied down to anything. You don't need to look after the asset. You don't have the financial risk of a boiler breaking. But in the UK, all you get is magnolia walls. You can see one behind me right now. And my landlord's furniture from Oak Furniture Land circa 2008. And it doesn't need to be that way. Yeah. Renting can be a tenure that is not inferior to buying. There is no need to rush onto the housing ladder buying some horrible little one-bed flat in Zone 8. And I think the rental market is simply not where it could be in the UK, and that's what I want to change. Right. Okay. So it's your frustrations that were behind that part on the website. I noticed a bit about personalised homes, and it was talking about no more magnolia and no more brown leather sofas. I thought, who's got a bug there? So now we know. Now we know the answer. I wasn't aware I was quite that transparent, but yes, good point. Tremendous. So actually, it's a very nice site, and again, listeners, just as usual, whenever it's safe for you to do so, you might be driving in the car listening to Elisabeth just now, but whenever it is safe to do so, check into the show notes. You'll see all the links to connect with her, connect with Skwire, and you can see exactly all the different stuff that we're talking about. And Elisabeth, you get different add-on services. You deal with flexible leases, the responsive landlord thing. I mean, you've got so many different parts of the puzzle. How are you finding managing it all within the company, within the business? Have you got a good ratio of how the different expertise and the resources are spread out? Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, our property management team are superstars, and it's just crucial to find people who have real passion for what they do and a desire to stretch themselves and bring in solutions. So, some of the property management solutions we found were some that the CTO had encountered in previous startups. Some were found in, the property roadshows. Some of them our property managers brought forward. So it's they're a very strong team there, and the same goes for our refurbishers and our buyers. And obviously the tech team is doing a fantastic work to build that product that enables the operations team to execute so well.
Exactly. And how have you found that the whole 2020 mad year of coronavirus? I mean, with working remotely and from home and everything else with your teams and so on and so forth, have you kept on top of things okay? Have you had to adapt in any specific ways?
Richard, the biggest change in my life was finding out that little Zoom background with the palm trees. That's it.
That made it for you.
Exactly. No, but jokes aside, the at the very beginning of the crisis, when no one was really certain of how long this all would take, we were operating our first portfolio as an Airbnb portfolio still. And we're
Wow.
excited about bookings picking up for the summer season, which is of course a lot stronger. Making the decision to switch that to long let was it was a hard decision to make because there was so much uncertainty. But I was so pleased to see certain innovation that we've already adopted, like providing virtual viewings and video walkthroughs that agents were not familiar with outside of London before were suddenly fine. And having had that in place already, we let our entire Airbnb portfolio, within, I think, 2 weeks as AST, getting all the necessary certifications and everything sorted in a beginning lockdown. So I was just absolutely baffled by how fantastic the team is. And I'm quite glad that, we see now that remote working does work and that tech can help solve a lot of these problems. And that's been adopted a lot faster than it would have otherwise, I think.
Yeah, I suppose a lot of the market have been just forced into it. Look, you have to do this now. You have to adapt. You want, well, I don't want to. Too bad. Because there is no other solution. There is no other option. You're right. Whereas some of the market, thankfully, actually enjoy it and they actually can see the benefits and the efficiencies and how we can really scale and leverage all the things you've touched upon today. It's a fantastic thing because it does. I mean, you mentioned this earlier in the chat that property, it's got this stuffy image, old fashioned, slow, solicitors that send out bits of paper by second class post and all sorts of nonsense that still goes on to this day.
It does have that image.
Crazy. Now, I love the international angle because you touched upon how you've had a view of renting in other European countries and so on. Is there any other big differences that you've seen?
The national obsession with housing over here is next level. And I love it. I am so into it. I constantly drag my boyfriend onto walks around the neighborhood to look at particularly nice houses. It's a bit of a national pastime, which it's really not anywhere else I've ever encountered.
Yeah, definitely. Where do you see the market going? Where do you see things happening? We've got a lot of stuff happening in the future. We're going to come out of this coronavirus at some point. We're coming out in fits and starts. We've got the dreaded Brexit around the corner. We've got recessions and so on building up. Any thoughts that you guys chat around in the office about where you see the big picture going with UK property?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, two main thoughts on this. One, we are still in the middle of the pandemic-induced shift in tenant preferences and housing. I have a friend who recently moved out to Kent into a little village with village pub and dog and huge back garden that he now has to rake and regret. But I wonder how many of these moves in a year or two from now, when we've all been vaccinated and things have gone back to normal as much as possible, I wonder how many of these moves will be reversed.
Yeah.
So the longevity of the current shift in demand patterns is something that I find quite interesting. And Do you know, I had a second point that just slipped my mind. It'll come back to me in about five
Yeah.
minutes time.
Okay, now we'll see if it does. Yeah, and yeah, the whole psychology of things definitely fascinates myself because, on one hand, as you say, we're very quick to forget things. So the people who have made a completely different shift in their lives might just, as you say, once vaccination, everything steps up. I said, yeah, I'm just going back to where I was. I'm going back to what I was used to, my comfort zone,
Mm.
my big city, whatever it is. So I'm going to reverse what I've done. And then there's other people who will no doubt they've actually had this moment as a wake up call. They've had this the slap in the face of, wait a minute, why were you commuting for 2 hours through
Yeah.
chaos to get to your work when you ended up being able to do the same amount of work in less time at home and you saw your family more and you were out in the park more and wait a minute. So there's a real strange dichotomy between those two. I don't know who's going to lead. I don't know where the majority or the minority is going to be, but it's going to be fascinating seeing it unfold.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think it's come back to me now. Another point that I'm quite interested to see is, I mean, as you know, I'm quite a big proponent of a better rental sector that is equal with different strengths and weaknesses to buying rather than inferior to buying. And I do think that between Brexit and the general election and COVID, there's been so much uncertainty recently that I feel like that could be, if it's handled well, a real boon to renting.
Mm.
People don't like to commit in times of uncertainty, and
Yeah.
buying a property is one of the biggest purchases you can possibly make.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, and that's a question for you actually. I
Mm.
wonder how much of this uncertainty is simply part of a property cycle, and how much of it is maybe just a blip on the radar.
Yeah, yeah. I think we certainly see it's almost as if I can go back to the kind of data and the software example. You have one layer that has maybe a cycle on it. Okay, and here's the economy. And then there's another layer behind it. Well, this is the COVID thing that happened. Wow, look at that. That's incredible and really unique. And then there's another layer behind it. Okay, well, the demographics of the country are changing, culture, society, whatever. And it's those layers on top of each other that then produce what happens on the ground. So it's a kind of complex mix of all three of those layers together, which really come together. And this is what's happening in that particular area, because in that particular area they happen to set up a new train line and so on and so forth. And over here, maybe the area is changing and it's being gentrified in some way or whatever it is. But it's a kind of complex mix of all of them together, I believe. And there are spikes that happen. There are cycles and seasons that will continually happen. And then there's just the very bare bones supply and demand fact that we're on an island, not building enough homes, whether you're buying or renting them. And then that's going to affect, the economy and the business itself as well. It's a
Yeah,
fascinating world to be involved in. It really is. I
it
mean, is
really
it not
is.
fascinating enough that you then go and throw all your data and your science on top of it?
That's exactly it, isn't it? I mean, you've got all of this housing stock that's been around for 200, 300 years, and
Yeah,
then you get someone like me throwing data onto it
I
and
love
picking the right stuff and
it.
creating. We almost view it as creating a new asset class because we
Mm,
take all of these small Victorian terraces and conversions and a new build flat here and ex council there,
yeah,
and we create this yielding unified portfolio out of it so
yeah.
that a larger scale investor can actually get into it for the first time in the UK.
Exactly, exactly. And with so much, certainty and evidence and data behind it to do that decision. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Oh, I could talk to you forever about this stuff. I suppose I should check with you. Artificial intelligence, we said it at the start. Have you got a lid on that? Do you have control of this? Can you promise us that your property robots are not going to take over the world? Because
Let
that's
me put it that
always the
way.
fear.
Let me put it that way. I promise I'm not going to send one of them up to Scotland to take your morning cup of tea away. How about
There you go, people. All,
that?
all you people that panic when you hear the two letters AI, just relax, right? It's nice robots that Elisabeth has. Fantastic. So, Elisabeth, folks want to get in touch with you, whether the tenant looking for the place, whether the investor looking to work with you, get your reports, build a portfolio, etc. What's the kind of best way? Is it just through the website and then start a conversation with you and take it from there?
Yeah, we're on all the channels. So whether you're looking at LinkedIn, our website, skwire.co.uk, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find us on Instagram if you want to see a couple of pictures of our lovely properties. We're out there.
And with no magnolia and no brown couches.
Promise no brown couches here.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Elisabeth, for your time today, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast. And yeah, let me know about these property robots. I'm sure my data science team will love that explanation.
I'll send them down. Thanks a million.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's show as much as I did. Remember, with the guests that you just saw, go into the show notes for the page because all of their links are there so that you can get in touch and to get more information. And talking about getting more information, more guests, more insights, more knowledge, etc., make sure you're subscribed. Get the subscription done, get the notifications on, and then we'll always keep in touch with you every single time a brand new show is going to come out. So thanks for tuning to This Week in Property.